All right, guys, welcome back. We're in a new unit. Our new unit is the Age of Exploration. So you're going to hear me call this a couple things. Age of Exploration. You might also hear me call it the Age of Encounter. They're both kind of the same, not kind of the same thing. They're both the same thing. So if you hear those two things, just know I'm talking about the same thing. But before we get started with some of the first explorers and some of the first aspects of the Age of Exploration, I want to go back a little bit. Let's go back and look at the Silk Road. We've talked about the Silk Road a lot this year. We talked about it a little bit in the last couple units. But let me just reiterate what the Silk Road was. The Silk Road was not an actual road. It was a system of trade routes between Europe and Asia. And these are some of them. There were all sorts of different trade routes. There were tons of things traded. I'm going to highlight a few things that were traded, but there are tons of things traded along these routes. So let's look at some of the things over here in southern China and northern South East Asia. We have things like copper, gold, silk, cinnamon, ginger. And when I start talking about these spices, these are all spices that we can run into the store and buy for relatively cheap. During this time in Europe, those spices didn't exist. So when I talk about people risking their lives and walking for hundreds of miles to trade these things, it's because they were worth so much. All right, down here in Vietnam, we have cardamom, ginger, ivory, gold, and sandalwood. In Sumatra, we have cloves and we have nutmeg. Southern India, we have things like black pepper. Black pepper was, and we talked about salt before being really worth its weight in gold. Black pepper was actually worth more than salt and gold at the time. It to Europeans at least, because they did not have it. Pepper didn't exist here until it was brought from India and the surrounding areas. Now, again, today we can go to the store and buy black pepper for really cheap. Some of you might even have pepper trees outside of your house. But yeah, it was worth a lot of money back then. Cloves, ginger. Still in India, we have things like cotton material, ivory, teak wood, and different types of oils, cooking oils, and different types of oils. In Arabia, we have things like frankincense and cooking oils and different oils. In Egypt, we have different types of grains. We have papyrus for paper making and cotton material. And again, there are a lot of other things being traded along the Silk Road, a lot of other items besides those. Those are just some that I picked to highlight. Now, how it worked was people from the East would trade with people from the West. These trips would take days, sometimes months, even more, through treacherous territory. So we have a huge desert up here. We have mountains to cross. The Himalaya mountains. There are all sorts of different climates that you're going through. We talked about Saudi Arabia and how it's just a huge desert, and so people were risking their lives to do these trades. That's one reason why things cost so much. Another reason why was most of the trade was controlled here by the Arab nations, the Arab populations here. In order to get to Europe or to get from Europe to Asia, you had to pass through a few places in this area, which all went through these Muslim empires that we had talked about, or these Middle Eastern empires that we've talked about before. And so they controlled this trade. So, of course, they made money off of it. And, if you're going to trade in their land, they deserve to make their money for controlling all of the trade. However, the Europeans wanted to get the stuff cheaper. Like we all kind of want to get things cheaper. So they wanted to literally cut out the middleman here. And instead of going on land routes, they thought, what if we were able to travel by sea and meet these trading posts on our own without having to pay any fees or taxes or anything, or worrying about traveling through these different empires in this area. And that's what we're going to talk about right now. So, first of all, with the age of exploration, we have to start in Europe with someone named Henry the Navigator. Henry the Navigator was a prince. He was from Portugal and he loved sailing and exploring, map making, map reading, all sorts of stuff that deals with sailing. He even started his own navigational school where people would learn how to sail, people could learn how to read maps and make maps and how to use the different instruments that you would need to sail on a ship. In his school, you would most certainly be studying things like caravels. A caravel is a type of ship. It's you might have seen the tall ships in Morro Bay or in wherever you live in coming into port, and they kind of look like those. They look a little bit like pirate ships. They are built for long voyages. They're fairly quick and efficient. You could take all the supplies that you need on the ship. You could also have a whole crew to help sail the ship. One thing they would use to navigate would be something called an astrolabe, and an astrolabe calculates the angle of the horizon to different celestial bodies like stars and things like that, which would help them know where they are out in the open ocean. If you've ever been on a boat and you're going along the coast and you can see the coast, provided there's no fog, it's pretty easy to navigate. You just look for landmarks. However, if you go so far out you can't see the coastline anymore, it gets more difficult to navigate because there's no references, there's no land references. So instruments like the astrolabe help them keep the same direction and keep their course even when they could not view landmarks. Now, these sailors that started exploring needed people to pay for them to explore. Many of the sailors didn't have, necessarily, maybe they had money, but it takes a lot of money in order to buy a ship, pay a crew, and pay for all of the supplies. Remember, they can't stop just here and there, so they have to get all of the supplies. If they're going to be gone for 2 months or 6 months or a year, they have to at least have enough supplies to get from one port to the next. So it did take a decent amount of money to sponsor these voyages. And most of the time, these voyages were sponsored by kings or queens or royalty, people with a lot of money. These people would sponsor for a couple reasons. One, maybe to find new lands, but more often it was to make money. If they could get if they could get to those trade ports and cut out, like I said, the middleman, they would make money off of all of the goods that they could get for a cheaper price. Let's look at a couple of these early explorers. First of all, Bartolomeo Diaz. He was Portuguese. He was the first European to sail around West Africa and to the tip of Africa. Now, this area of Africa, around the tip of Africa, is pretty dangerous as far as sailing goes. You have two oceans that meet. You have the Indian Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean, which creates for strong currents and big waves and windy conditions. So it's not the easiest place in the world to sail. And Bartolomeo Diaz was the first to go from Portugal to the tip of Africa. The next person that I'm going to talk about is Vasco da Gama. He's the first European to not only make it to the tip of Africa, he actually rounded the tip of Africa, sailed along the east coast, then across the Indian Ocean over to Calcutta, India. So he's the first European to make it all the way around Africa and to India. So let me give you a little bit better idea of what that looks like. So we start here in Lisbon, Portugal, and I'm just going to go over his route. And this does an aerial views. We fly across Africa, but I'll show you how his route actually was. And this is Calcut, India. He's the green highlighted route. So as I zoom out, you can start to see how large these things are, like Africa, huge continent. So he started here in Portugal, sailed around West Africa, down to the tip of Southern Africa, around Southern Africa. And when he made his first stop here, he stopped for about a month to recoup and get some more supplies and things like that. Sailed up West Africa and then across the Indian Ocean to Calcut. And that was the first European to, by sea, make it to India. Well, that's it, guys. That's your first couple explorers in the age of exploration. And we'll see you next time.